Is Myanmar committing genocide against the Rohingya? We ask if such a declaration would change the future of the world's most persecuted people. I'm Imran Garda, and today's Newsmaker is the violence against Rohingya Muslims. During World War II, a Jewish lawyer coined the term genocide. He said it was when a national or ethnic group is systematically destroyed through mass murder. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan believes that definition describes what's happening to Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. The United Nations says nearly 400 of them have been killed in the past week. Myanmar's army says it's in the middle of a battle with an armed group in Rakhine State. But activists say the military is using the fight to exterminate the ethnic minority. The international community has been widely criticized for ignoring the problem for years. Could this all change if the violence was designated a genocide? Natalie Perhonen reports.
For Rohingya refugees, the Bay of Bengal is a lifeline to safety. The fear of more violence in Rakhine State has driven them to open waters and Bangladesh's shores. But even trying to survive can carry deadly consequences.
There was another boat behind us in which my relatives were there. Suddenly that sank in the sea and the military started firing at us. 10 members of our family, including my son and grandson, drowned in the sea.
Each day, more families are making a similar journey, joining tens of thousands of Rohingya who have fled in the wake of the worst violence the community has faced in Myanmar in 5 years. Many of them have accused the military of serious human rights violations, ranging from rape to mass killings and arson.
They burned our houses. We couldn't take our belongings. We were hiding near a hill for 2 days. We were there in the rain, without food, and with my children.
Journalists have been blocked from accessing northern Rakhine State to verify such accounts. The government says the military is carrying out a security operation to maintain peace and stability. But the testimonies of refugees who have fled have spurred calls for international action.
Bölgenin stratejik önemi sebebiyle Myanmar devletini yanlarına almak isteyen güçlerin hiçbiri de bu insanlık suçunu durdurma konusunda caydırıcı adımlar atmıyor. Orada bir soykırım var.
Victims of genocide are not random. They are deliberately targeted for belonging to a certain national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide says it means committing acts with the intent to destroy a group, either partly or completely. That includes killing, causing serious bodily or mental harm, or deliberately inflicting conditions on the group to bring about its physical destruction. The term genocide carries the weight of legal responsibility. Signatories to the convention are meant to investigate the accusations and determine the facts to see if there is intent. But that's also meant a delayed response by the international community to real-time horror. It took years to prosecute acts of genocide committed in Cambodia, Rwanda, and Srebrenica, long after the atrocities had been committed. The UN Secretary-General has not used the term genocide, but this was his response when asked if what's happening in Myanmar now amounts to ethnic cleansing.
I think that we are facing a risk. I hope we don't get there. And I appeal to all authorities in Myanmar, civilian authorities and military authorities, to indeed put an end to this violence that, in my opinion, is creating a situation that can destabilize the region.
Unlike genocide, ethnic cleansing is not a crime under international law. There is no legal obligation for the international community to investigate what is happening to Myanmar's Rohingya community. But history shows there is often a moral responsibility. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London is Maung Zani. He's a non-resident fellow at the Slook Reith Institute, which specializes in the study of genocide, conflict and human rights. And from Yangon, Myanmar, we have Nyo Aung Myint. He's a former member of the ruling National League for Democracy Party. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Maung, let me begin with you. Is it a genocide what's going on right now against the Rohingya?
It is emphatically a genocide, whether it's defined, narrowly based on the UN Convention on Prevention and Punishment of Genocide Act of 1948, or defined sociologically as done by Raphael Lemkin, who coined the word genocide. Genocide is the destruction of an ethnic, racial, national, or religious group. And so either way, sociologically broadly defined or, legally defined, what Burma or Myanmar is doing to Rohingya in the last 39 years is a genocide, period.
So let me ask Nyo Aung Myint. The other guest says legally and sociologically can be defined as genocide. I'm certain you disagree. Tell me why.
The reason is that the very recent, August 25th, the incident in 30, the police outposts have been attacked, and then one military has been, the headquarters has been attacked. And then as well as the Hindu community and Arakan ethnic community has been attacked by the civilians being attacked. Mm-hmm. So in this case, I don't see that any on the ground that there was any genocide of any evidence. Sure. I also like to request they make a question that the Dr. Zani could to prove that it was any hard evidence of the genocide.
Okay, but before we go to hard evidence for genocide, let me ask you, sir. Yes, you mentioned that attack against the police stations, right? Now, fast forward a couple weeks, those 400 people who have been killed and the 100,000 people who have fled across the border to Bangladesh, are they responsible for those attacks? Should they face collective punishment for the attacks of a certain individual group of militants? Do they all bear the responsibility?
Yes, we're going to look at the case in the Rakhine State, which is like you called it the Rohingya, and we called it Bengalis, and then it's fair to say that the migrant issue, it was from the South Indian, and then from that area it came to there, and then that's going to be racial conflict and communal violence time to time.
But can I ask you, again, those 400 that have been killed and the 100,000 that have fled, are they responsible for the actions of a few people who have attacked police stations?
Yeah, because this is the self-defense manner. When police being attacked in the midnight after 1 a.m. in that time, and then the thousands of the rioters and then approach to the police station. And then this is the defensive measure. So when someone trying to kill you, you're going to.
So I just want to be absolutely certain. I just want to be absolutely 100% certain. 400 people killed, 100,000 have crossed the border. Human Rights Watch has shown us satellite imagery. This is in the middle of monsoon season, 19 major burn sites. So you have villages on fire. 400 people killed, 100,000 on the move, 19 villages on fire set by your army. You're telling me this is all self-defense and justified?
We got to prove that the Rohingya, the terrorist group, Assad, has been burned down, and we got to prove that there was no military or security forces burned down those immigrants, the villages. Because that's the very limited, because the Dawn San Suu Kyi-led government has very concerned about the security measure as well as the human rights and international standard.
But
I don't think that that's only political.
Our skepticism. You would accept our skepticism when you don't even want to call them what they want to be called, right? So they want to be named one thing, Rohingya or Rohingya, and you just told me earlier in the program that you call them Bengalis. There's a certain dehumanizing here. If you can't even call them what they want to be called, surely there's a problem here.
Yeah, we have after 1948, we have the independence from the British colonial period. And then we have only 135 ethnic groups. And then, but this is not a non-discriminatory. The Muslim, in the Rakhine state, they claim to be them. This is the major, the issue, and then two communal, conflicts. And then I totally understand. I am also really concerned and also respect the human rights. And then there was no discrimination because we have millions of Muslim community, Myanmar Muslim, any Muslim, Indian Muslim, Pakistani Muslim.
Fine.
Yeah,
I want to move on for a second. Before I go back to Maung, I want you to have a listen to Aung San Suu Kyi. She's been speaking very recently. Let's have a little listen to what she had to say, and then I'm going to ask you a question off the back of it. Let's have a listen.
We would like to thank India particularly for the strong stand that it has taken with regard to the terrorist threat that came to our country a couple of weeks ago. And we believe that together we can work to make sure that terrorism is not allowed to take root on our soil or on the soil of our neighboring countries.
Okay, so Maung, Aung San Suu Kyi is framing this as a response to terrorism, something that you heard coming from Yangon and the other guest. We had Narendra Modi also supporting her in terms of her fight against terrorism. You tell me, Maung, because I'm hearing from Nyo that this is all self-defense against terrorism. Tell me why you disagree.
Well, I disagree because I specialized in genocides of this particular group for the last 6 or 7 years consecutively. And I have published with my co-author a comprehensive study of Burma's treatment of Rohingyas dating back to the 1970s. So, my friend Yo Min is talking about this issue as if the issue arose back in October 2016 when a group of militant Rohingyas killed 12 police officers guarding the borders. I mean, that is utterly anti and ahistorical. Let me say this. He asked for the evidence, and then Suu Kyi frames the issue as a national self-defense against what they frame as terrorism and terrorist group. Well, let me tell you this. My late great-uncle was deputy commander of all Burmese military forces in Rakhine. He was also deputy commander of almost exclusively Rohingya administration in 1961 called Mayu District. It was at the time when the Burmese military as well as the civilian democratic government of Prime Minister UNU officially recognized the Rohingya as both full citizens of the Union of Burma and an ethnic community constituting, Burmese multi-ethnic fabric. So I think, the issue of Rohingya cannot be understood unless you look at the way in which the policies of Burmese military have evolved regarding Rohingya.
Okay, so let me then ask Nyo Aung Mint. Nyo Aung Mint, why has it changed? Why can't they be citizens? Why can't they be treated as equal citizens in a multi-ethnic nation state? Why does Myanmar want to get rid of them?
I think that the Dr. Zani a little bit politicized about the Rohingya, or what we called it, the new immigrants has been denied. Actually, it was not, because in the 1982, because the law that because my forefather was born in Myanmar. So I myself, it's a Mon ethnic, and then Burman. I'm a mix. I'm not the Burman, the improper, and then I'm a half and half. And then so we going to fill up the form that who is your great grandfather?
Okay.
That's
let me ask you directly then, Nyo. Sure. Let me ask you directly. Do you believe that these people who want to stay in Rakhine State, many of whom trace their lineage back 2, 3, 4, 5 generations, right? Do you believe that they have a place in your society? Do you believe that they can be a part of your society?
That's true, because that's there was some kind of the local conflicts, and then also I would like to point it out that the local authorities sometimes using some kind of issuing some ridiculous things that what we do not accept. But after previous government, President U Thein Sein came to power, that's going to be very relaxing. And then it's also because of the nation God. That's what I like to quote, saying that he said that the only peaceful nation could have a chance to be developed. So in this case, there was no conflict. But very unfortunately, in 2012...
Please, can I ask you the question again, because I haven't got a straight answer. Can they stay in your country as equal citizens? Can they stay in the country they were born in as equal citizens?
That's correct. Because,
but they're not equal citizens right now, so you have to give them citizenship.
So they have a few people have their citizens, and then many has to be to cross what they call the scanning process, and then but they refuse, and then this is in 2012. That's a politicized. Before that, there was no problem, and then very less problem because the government. I'm not a government side, but when I look at it, when the two communities got a conflict, and then two communal violence time to time, so the government wanted to issue that the citizen, and then that's it, no problem.
Okay.
But only
so
one thing.
Has the government done anything? Has the government done anything wrong in the past few weeks?
The past few weeks, no. That's
no.
The police, the citizens, they were victimized.
The UN Secretary General is talking about ethnic cleansing here. When he says that, do you think he's just made it up and it's come out of nowhere?
Maybe he might not have correct information. The problem is that what I found it on the ground, because last couple of days ago, I was working on the international media to get the access into the Mangdor Buthidaung area. They're going to see their own eyes. So because of the lack of information,
but you talk about lack of information, yet the government and the military is not allowing UN observers to actually see what's going on in Rakhine State. Maung Zarni, you want to come in, jump in.
Yes, I think I categorically disagree with the way my friend Nyo Mien frames the issue as essentially the Burmese government responding to terrorism. They are denying and covering up what they know to be the intentional policy of the Burmese military over the last almost 40 years, since 1978 February, when the Burmese military launched the centrally coordinated and orchestrated large-scale assault on Rohingya community under the pretext of immigration check. And out of that operation, according to the Burmese official military intelligence count in the book that I'm holding here, written by ex-General Kim Yon, close to 280,000 people were driven out of the country through campaigns of terror that was similar to what we are witnessing in the last 2 weeks. And the similar wave of mass terror was launched in 1991-92 under this man, General Kim Yon's leadership, commandership. And a 250,000 people, 250,000 people fled the country. Now back in, the United Nations has said officially yesterday, since October 2016, another 230,000, this was in the Reuters news agency today, also fled the country. So over the last 39 years, the Burmese military has systematically and intentionally either destroyed communities or driven out close to 1 million population. And all of this policy initiatives and measures had nothing to do with the militant attacks that took place a year ago and that took place 2 weeks ago. And finally, in terms of evidence, in addition to the incitement in the Burmese media for genocidal attacks on this community called Rohingya, the Burmese military and successive governments have maintained conditions that are designed to debilitate and weaken the community physically, stopping the international aid, denying this community of access to medicine. There's only one intention behind stopping food and restricting diet and medicine to this community.
Okay.
That is the physical and biological destruction of the entire community.
Okay, so very finally, let me ask Nyo Aung Myint. You asked for evidence, and genocide needs the accuser to prove intent. Isn't the fact that a major general actually wrote a book about getting rid of these people enough intent? When you match it with the policy, it shows that your country doesn't want these people and wants to get rid of them.
No, actually, this is the problem is that I heard from the Dr. Zani, a friend of mine, and who is a very emotionally pointed, but I'm very difficult to accept his accusation, because the reason is that the exaggeration and then also the illegal immigrants. The issue is that the migration issue, and then people, and then in the Rakhine State, and then right now I'm worried that the genocide against the Rakhine, the ethnic nationalities are very much in danger. So I don't think that the last 2 weeks ago there was government.
Are you saying there's a genocide? Are you saying there's a genocide the other way?
Yeah, that's the other way, because the 3 years old, the Hindu young the girl got butchered, 3 years old. And you can imagine.
And that's a crime, and that's terrible. But can you honestly tell me, sir, that you believe that the Rohingya Muslims are committing a genocide against other ethnic communities? Is that how you see it in Rakhine State?
That's what I worry, that without any compromising, negotiating, and then solving the problem, that's going to be communal.
Do you believe they have the power to commit genocide against other ethnic groups in Rakhine State?
That's the arrogant woman, like the first Myo, with another smaller Rakhine community ethnic group, been attacked. The 5 women were killed, and 1 was disappeared right now. And then the Hindu community have been attacked by the very militant terrorists, the Muslim community in Rakhine State. This is what we're really concerned about.
Okay, Maung, if you can give me your final word in 20 seconds, please, because I'm really over time. I've got to wrap. But Maung, finish us off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the greatest tragedies of the, Burmese genocide, or at the very least, according to the UN, crimes against humanity, coming out of a UN High Commission on the, human rights, is that, the Burmese dissidents or former dissidents, such as Nyo Aung Myin, Aung San Suu Kyi, and so-called 88 generation leaders, they spent years in exile like myself or behind bars, fighting for human rights, and now they are trampling on the principle of human rights. They are showing no compassion as a Buddhist community. And so I think that is the greatest loss for Burma as both a country struggling to get human rights for everybody, and for a country that claims to be Buddhist. I mean, when these former dissidents, including Aung San Suu Kyi, close ranks with their former jailers that are accused of international crimes, and adopt the language of national security, and showing their racism towards Muslims and particularly Rohingya. I mean, that is a great national self-harm done by the so-called human rights community in Burma, including Suu Kyi herself. Okay, gentlemen, I wish we had more time. We do not, but we will no doubt be continuing to watch this story as it unfolds. It's a terrible tragedy for those tens of thousands on the move, for those people who are many languishing in camps now across the border in Bangladesh. Maung Zarni and Nyo Aung Myin, I thank you both for joining us. Still ahead, gassed to death, UN investigators say the Syrian regime is to blame for major chemical attacks. We talk to a former US ambassador to Syria. And why prominent conservationists say they can no longer protect whales from Japanese hunters.
We concluded that the chemical attack was carried out by a Syrian Su-22 aircraft, which dropped 3 conventional bombs and sarin bomb in Khan Shaykhun. The sarin attack killed over 80 individuals, most of them women and children, and injured hundreds of others.
The UN has issued a damning report on the Syrian regime, with its investigators accusing Assad's forces of carrying out dozens of sarin gas attacks. Among the 33 incidents, the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria cited the incident in Idlib province. That attack prompted the US to respond by firing missiles on Syrian aircraft. But the UN says chemical attacks continue. Well, joining me now from Yale University is Robert Ford. He was the last US ambassador to Syria before the war became full-blown. He not only believes Bashar al-Assad will win the conflict, but also that US policy has played a part in getting us to this point, and we're at a very terrible place, aren't we, Ambassador Ford? Good to talk to you once again. So Assad has tortured his people, he's barrel-bombed his people. The UN now confirming that he's used chemical weapons on them at least 33 times. Despite all of that, you think he's here to stay and nobody's going to shift him off that throne right now. Tell me why.
Well, I don't say it with any joy. I don't say it with any happiness. But the reality is that Bashar al-Assad's government is advancing in the Damascus area, taking neighborhoods that it had fought for years to capture. His forces are advancing in eastern Syria and are now in Deir ez-Zor, the city of Deir ez-Zor in eastern Syria. They retook Aleppo at the beginning of the year. They are advancing on all sides, little by little. It's gradual, but it is steady, it is continued. And there is no sign that any combination of countries in the region and in the world are prepared to change their policies and put real pressure on the Syrian government. And so Assad militarily will win the war, and he will stay in power. And despite the crimes which you mentioned, and which the United Nations has detailed, he will not be held accountable.
What's your biggest personal regret when it comes to your time as the most senior U.S. diplomat in Damascus at the time? I know you tried to raise awareness. You tried to talk to Barack Obama about what was going on. Do you have any personal regrets?
I have huge regrets on two levels. Number one, the biggest regret I have is that so many Syrians who wanted simply to have accountable government, wanted to have a better government. I don't say democracy, I just say better government. They failed, and so many of them died. Many of them died terrible deaths. On a personal level, I regret that some of my actions were interpreted by Syrian opposition as to mean that they should either take up arms or that they should have maximalist demands in negotiations. The United States always said that the opposition needs to negotiate a transition government with the Syrian government, with Bashar. But we haven't even been able to get to a serious negotiation yet.
Barack Obama staying out of the conflict, was that a mistake? Should he have intervened militarily?
Well, first, I think we have to remember that this is a conflict between Syrians, first and foremost. It's not a conflict involving the United States at the first level. It's not even a conflict involving Russia and Iran at the first level. It's a conflict between Syrians. And Syrians have to find a solution to these Syrian problems. I do think the United States could have done more in 2012 and 2013 and even 2014 to help reach a serious negotiation. But that negotiation depended on the Syrian government feeling real pressure, and frankly, it never did. And so it was always easy for the Syrian government to refuse to negotiate.
As we speak right now, the war still rages, and as you say, Assad is maybe stronger than ever. He's got Russian help, he's got Iranian help. Some see the country now as just becoming a sort of Iranian vassal. Is that how you see it? Is Assad just essentially Iran's boy in their new phase of empire building in the region?
No, that is not how I see it. As I said, this is primarily a conflict between Syrians, and it is a conflict primarily about Syria. Unquestionably, for sure, Iran has a big influence now with the Syrian government in Damascus, no question. And Russia also has great influence in Damascus, no question. But the final decisions about what the Syrian government is going to do are not made in Tehran. The final decisions are not made in Moscow. The final decisions are taken in Damascus. And in particular, given that sometimes there is competition between Russia and Iran for influence in Damascus, the Syrian president is able to use one, Iran or Russia, against the other, Iran or Russia. He's a very clever political figure, and so he is not just a vassal, or he is not just a pawn of outside powers.
I suppose in the past it was a question of taking out Assad not being a priority maybe for President Barack Obama. Under President Donald Trump, it's probably not on the table at all, and the priority is to defeat Daesh wherever they are. And as a part of doing that, the current US policy is by arming and funding the PYD/YPG. Their sister organization, the PKK, blows up civilians here in Turkey. At the moment, the argument is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You've got to use these guys to defeat those other bad guys. Is that a good short-term strategy, or will it maybe backfire long-term?
Well, first on the Obama administration, where I worked, for 3 years on Syria. It was never the American policy to remove Assad. The American policy was to have Syrians negotiate a transition government where Assad would or would not play a part. Viewers might be interested to know that the Syrian opposition in Geneva in February of 2014 put a proposal on the table where they would have negotiated whether or not Bashar al-Assad stayed. That was the Syrian opposition that did that. We were supportive. It wasn't really our business. So fast forward to today. The American priority, as you said, is to eliminate, to destroy the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, both in Iraq and in Syria. And the Americans, beginning with the Barack Obama administration in 2015, began to work closely with the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia and even begin talks with its PYD political arm. I personally think that's a terrible mistake for 2 reasons. Number one, it will aggravate ethnic tensions inside Syria, just as we have seen Arab-Kurdish tensions in Iraq. So I fear we are going to see more Arab-Kurdish ethnic disputes, conflicts, unease in northeastern Syria. The population distribution in northeastern Syria is mixed. It's not homogeneous. There's a Kurdish town next to an Arab town, next to a Kurdish village, next to an Arab village, or a Syrian village. It's very mixed. And so trying to create a single political entity, as the PYD is trying to do, promises to be fraught, to be full of difficulty. Second problem with the American strategy is that it is causing problems for our NATO ally, Turkey. Turkey is a big country, has a population of over 80 million people, and there absolutely are links between the YPG and the PKK, which is on the American terrorism list, it's on the Turkish terrorism list, and it's on the European Union terrorism list. And I fear that in addition to the political damage that this American action with the YPG is taking, it's actually going to aggravate the security problems that our Turkish allies confront inside Turkey.
And as we sort of come full circle back to the beginning and that news that came in from the United Nations about the fact that they have hard evidence that the Syrian regime had gassed its own people, Assad had gassed his own people 33 times. I may be young, but I'm old enough to remember when Saddam Hussein was taken out for gassing his own people. So with that, with all of that in mind, right, all these countries, I know you say this is a war between Syrians, but it's become a free-for-all with regional and international actors. Are all the countries that said it's okay for the Assad regime to stick around, and those who think right now, well, he's a bad guy, but he's probably the least bad guy, or he's not as bad as Daesh, or he's not as bad as Nusra, are all of them complicit or culpable in some way for wanting to keep him in power because he's gassing his own people?
Problem with your line of argument is that the Syrians themselves have to decide what kind of government would follow the Bashar al-Assad regime, the family, the Assad family that governs the country and the political allies that they have inside Syria. Foreign countries, even if they were to remove Bashar al-Assad, just as the Americans removed Saddam Hussein, it doesn't end the fighting, it doesn't end the killing. There has to be, in the end, an agreement between a majority of Syrians about what kind of government and who in government they will accept. And that kind of negotiation we have never been able to get to.
Okay. Ambassador Robert Ford, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you very much for joining us. Since 2005, the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society has confronted Japanese ships over what it calls illegal whale hunts. But now the environmental group says it will have to stop its operations. The reason? The whalers are avoiding the activist boats by using military-grade surveillance. But the people at Sea Shepherd say it doesn't have to be that way. and accused the governments of Australia, New Zealand and the US of prioritizing Japanese business interests over conservation. Basil Rehan explains.
The Antarctic Ocean remains one of the world's greatest natural environments, home to some of the ocean's most amazing creatures, including nearly a dozen species of whale. For the past 12 years, this pristine seascape has also been a battleground between Japanese whalers and the activists who chase and expose them. But now, the most prominent whale conservation group says the chase has been paused. Sea Shepherd says intercepting whaling vessels has become too difficult. They accuse the Japanese government of supporting whalers with advanced military surveillance, making it possible for whalers to track anti-whaling vessels in real time. Sea Shepherd claims most of the credit for massive reductions in Japanese whaling quotas, from more than 1,000 whales in 2005 to below 350 today. But there are now concerns that without the watchful eye of Sea Shepherd, that progress could quickly roll back. Japan has long claimed its whaling industry is strictly for research purposes. That's how Japanese whalers get around an international moratorium on the practice, in place since 1985. The international community and conservationists have long contested Japan's version of the story. In 2014, Australia won a temporary ban on Japanese whaling in the International Court of Justice, but Japan resumed its scientific hunt a year later.
We have to agree to disagree. However, that does not mean we'll take all whales.
Nations including Australia, the US, and New Zealand have maintained their opposition to whaling. But the founder of Sea Shepherd says it's not enough, going so far as to accuse the three nations of being in league with Japan, putting economic interests ahead of the rule of law, endangering a global effort to protect one of the ocean's greatest treasures. Basil Rehan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Woodstock, Vermont by Paul Watson. He's the founder of the Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. And from Tokyo, Michael Penn. He's the president of the Shingetsu News Agency. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Paul Watson, let me begin with you, sir. Why have you abandoned your pursuit of the Japanese?
We haven't abandoned our pursuit. We're just looking at a new strategy because we found last year that we can't close in on the whaling fleet because Japan is investing $50 million a year. They're using military technology. They're operating in a larger area with a reduced quota. It makes it very, very difficult. So it would be a waste of our time and our resources to go after them at this point. But we will return. What's your new strategy? Well, that we haven't developed yet. The other problem that we have is the Australian New Zealand government refusing to uphold their responsibility and their obligations under international law to stop these illegal activities. And so we're hoping that with not going down there this year, that it will motivate Australia and New Zealand to actually send a vessel, which they promised to do. Right. I mean, you've called them hostile governments in the past. Is it really the fact that they're hostile governments? Or maybe they just don't want to get into a fight with Japan. Can you understand that from a geopolitical perspective? Well, that's understandable, except that they're signatories to the International Whaling Commission, to the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice has condemned Japan. They're in contempt of the Australian federal court. They've been fined $1 million, which they refuse to pay. Japan is, what they're doing is illegal, and it's the obligation, especially of New Zealand and Australia, to uphold the law in the areas under their jurisdiction. These whales, many of them are being killed in the Australian Antarctic territory. Yeah, Michael Penn, the man makes a good point, right? What Japan is doing is illegal according to international law. So why does it continue to do it with impunity?
Well, there was a judgment of the International Court against Japan a couple of years ago, and Japan does seem to be, essentially brushing that aside for the time being. I think the first point they would make is that in terms of the enforcement of that judgment, it's probably not Sea Shepherd's place to do that. They have no particular mandate from the international community to do so. So I think that their first point of view would be whatever they're doing, this is something that needs to be settled between nation states through negotiations and not through, sort of random acts on the high seas.
Okay, so Paul, it's not your duty to act on behalf of the international community, according to Michael. How do you respond to that?
Well, he's absolutely right. But if the international community is not reacting, that's why we step in. Japan's been doing this since 1989. It's been illegal, and nobody's lifting a finger to uphold the law. So that's why we're involved. We'd rather not be doing this. We would rather that the signatories to these agreements uphold their responsibilities and their obligations.
Yeah, after some of the discussions that were had in July by the parliament, it seems, Michael, as if the Japanese are not keen on dressing this up anymore. They're talking very openly about restarting commercial whaling. They're not even talking about doing it for scientific purposes or so. Is that the popular consensus within Japan?
Well, I don't think that the overall Japanese public thinks about it a whole lot. What it is there's some communities on the coastal Japan which, this is part of their livelihood and their tradition, and they lobby the government to maintain their industry and their traditions. So I think that that would be, the domestic situation is that there probably isn't a very heavy pro-whaling lobby, but there isn't a very strong counter lobby on the other side, which is the different situation from most of the rest of the world, where you have, say, an environmental lobby which would like their governments to crack down on whaling, but there's no whaling industry on the other side as kind of a counterbalance.
Mm-hmm. Michael, is there an acceptance that Japan doesn't need to do this for scientific research, which has been the reason given to the international community for the past couple decades?
My understanding is that Japan has not abandoned the reasoning that this is an issue of scientific research. In terms of restarting commercial whaling without any cover or without any rationale of it being related to science, I haven't heard that. It may be true, but that's not my understanding at what the current policy is.
Paul, do you accept that some of this can be done for the purposes of scientific research?
Well, it's not my position to determine that. That's the International Whaling Commission. That's their responsibility. They've said that it's not science. The International Court of Justice has ruled that it's not science, as has the Australian Federal Court. But there's nothing traditional about going down to the Southern Ocean and killing whales in defiance of international law. Japan has no tradition of that. And so the reason this is happening is because the Institute for Cetacean Research is a government corporation, and the people who sit on that board have been appointed for political reasons. They're all friends of the government. The Japanese people, as he said, they don't care one way or the other. But the world community does care, and Japan has to, at some point, recognize that. It's already backfired on them, because when the International Court of Justice ruled against China over the Philippine dispute, they ruled in favor of the Philippines. Japan said, okay, you've got a ruling, you have to obey by this. And the Chinese said, well, you don't have to, so why should we? So it set a very dangerous precedent.
Michael, is there an element of embarrassment when it comes to the fact that the Japanese are just flagrantly violating international norms and continuing to do what they want to do when it comes to this specific issue? Because Japan is very much on side when it comes to everything else in foreign relations.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Japan, is a general rule, is a country which takes international laws and international engagements somewhat more seriously than most other countries in the world. And in a sense, this issue is kind of an outlier in that respect. In terms of, a sense of embarrassment, well, to be honest, the Abe administration has not shown any public evidence of that. They constantly talk about the rule of law at sea in regard to China and the South China Sea issue, and they seem to do so without seeing any connection between that issue and this issue. So I do agree that it doesn't fully comprehend the two issues if you put them together.
Right. Paul, when you said you're not abandoning your pursuit, but you're changing tactics, how much of this had to do with the fact that there were those who believed that you had a just cause, but didn't really back your tactics? Because there were those and some very mainstream voices who said that your tactics endanger lives, that you shouldn't be taking on these vessels. Did you factor that in at all?
We've caused no injury in the entire time that we've been down there since 2005. But what we have done is saved over 6,500 whales. We've helped to reduce the quota from 1,035 to 333. We've made this an international issue, especially through our television show, Whale Wars. And we assisted in providing evidence for the International Court of Justice. I think we've done quite a bit. But at some point, we simply can't. We have to operate within the boundaries of practicality and the law. And Japan has also just passed new anti-terrorism laws, right, which some of them are specifically designed for Sea Shepherd. Right. And now just approaching a whaling vessel will be an act of terrorism.
Yeah, Michael, tell me what you think about those anti-terrorism laws. The fact that you could be a part of a vessel going after the Japanese because you're anti-whaling, you have no intention to cause harm, but you can be prosecuted as a terrorist if the Japanese catch you.
In terms of what the Japanese government's position would be, is I think that they're signaling that from their point of view, there's an attempt to bully them on the issue of whaling, and they're not going to give in to it. They're going to respond in a tough way.
Paul Watson and Michael Penn, it's been good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.